Afternoon, women of welcome. Bree here. I am gonna wait maybe just a minute for y'all to jump on, but this is gonna be a really quick video. We've been getting questions from ladies over the last just couple weeks about Cubans and what's going on. Are they being allowed to seek asylum or not? So I'm actually going to be answering 4 questions pretty briefly about what's going on with Cubans who are seeking asylum in the U.S. So these are the 4 questions I'm going to answer as briefly as I can, so in an effort to be helpful about this. So, and you're answering your questions you've been sending in. So 1, is the U.S. accepting Cubans seeking asylum? Why can't Cubans who seek asylum come by sea? Is there a mass exodus of Cubans or Haitians, for that matter, coming by sea? And who's being allowed in or being expelled along the southern border right now? So those are the 4 questions I'm going to be answering. If you want to know more about that or you have questions about that, just stick around. This is going to be quick. But what I will say is we have a lot of new people in the community, and we're so glad that you're here and that you're with us. So if you are new to the community, something that most of our Women of Welcome community is pretty familiar with is that when hot headlines surface, we rarely address those things immediately. And we know that there are developing stories and narratives and headlines. And so because we don't address those things immediately, what we're doing is we're checking in with various partners on the ground and nationally to try and get the fullest and most accurate story for you so that we can give you unbiased and factual information instead of just feeding off maybe a clickable headline or something like that. So there are layers, obviously, to all of these developing stories. So that's what we're doing. We're kind of just checking all of the angles and then coming to you to answer the questions as best that we can. So same is the case with what's going on in Cuba. We certainly don't know everything that's going on, but I can tell you what we do know. And many of you have heard or read about Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas's statement during his latest press conference, where he clearly told Cubans not to come to the U.S., specifically by sea, that it was dangerous, and that if anyone that was intercepted off of the coast, they would be returned or repatriated to another country. And repatriated basically it means what it sounds like, and that is that you would be designated to a third country, another country, and not be allowed to seek asylum in the U.S. So you'd kind of be facilitated somewhere else if you were intercepted by sea. So that statement has frustrated some folks, but in reality, Secretary Mayorkas was actually just stating current U.S. Asylum process. He was stating immigration policy that we have. So the U.S. does not, I think it can be kind of surprising to folks, but the U.S. does not accept asylum seekers by sea. And we'll get to that in a minute, more on that in a minute. But I'm going to address these 4 questions, and that will kind of be in that. So 1, is the U.S. Accepting Cubans seeking asylum? And the short answer is yes. Cubans can seek asylum in the U.S., but according to international and U.S. asylum laws, they have to do so by land. Cubans and other asylum seekers are not allowed to present for asylum by sea. It's worth noting that currently, right now, there aren't any other ways to apply for asylum in country. So in Cuba, you cannot apply in country for asylum. You can't do that in Haiti, and there's lots of countries you cannot do that in. And so Cubans really only have one avenue right now, and that is to come and present at the southern border in person on land by way of Mexico. So here's the answer to the next question that inevitably follows, and that is, why can't Cubans seek asylum in the U.S. by sea? And so again, according to U.S. asylum laws, asylum seekers are not accepted by sea because when intercepting people by sea, the government is actually not bound to the same laws. So things get more complicated when you're technically not in country, or if you're intercepted in international waters. So we have asylum laws for on land, and we have different processes and protocols for when we're off land in various bodies of water. Some of you may be familiar with this policy that was called wet foot, dry foot. And that was a policy that actually allowed Cubans to present on land, dry foot, and not by sea, which is wet foot, and automatically get status. They were automatically allowed into the country and put into this kind of parole process for a year that gave them automatic legal status, protected status, and work authorization. But this policy actually ended in 2017 by President Obama. He ended that policy. So while that policy had ended, there was another policy that was established in 1966 called the Cuban Adjustment Act. and that is still active. And that immigration policy says that Cubans can present, again, on land, request asylum. They enter into kind of a similar parole status, and if not contested or background checks suggest that they're not a threat to the U.S. Security or anything else, then they can receive a green card. So the difference, the real kind of difference there is that they don't get automatic status, protected status, or automatic work authorization in that. So there is a policy there for, it's called the Cuban Adjustment Act, and that's still very active. So the third question is, are we seeing a mass exodus of Cubans, or Haitians for that matter, same regional kind of area, by sea? And as of today, the data we have says no. It suggests no, we're not seeing this mass exodus of people coming to the U.S. By sea or by land. Are we seeing more come by land? I mean, that's, right now we're working off June data. And so right now what we would say is, if so, it's kind of minimal, maybe marginal. We don't really have July numbers. We work off of these numbers are reported by CBP every the next month. So right now we're working off June, and we will have July numbers in mid-August. So what we do know from the June data is that Cubans that are presenting on land are actually being let in at higher rates than others. So that leads me to the fourth question, and that is, who is being allowed in or who is being expelled at the southern border right now? And so we are still under Title 42. And so for those of you who don't know what Title 42 is, Title 42 is a health code put in place during COVID by the government, which basically is put in place to restrict further COVID exposure of American citizens by those migrating into the U.S. And so that's still very much in place, and we're seeing the vast majority of people being expelled still from the border. The border is still effectively closed for immigrants and asylum seekers under that Title 42 code. So until that's lifted, the majority of people are being expelled unless you're a family unit seeking asylum. So here are the stats. 55% of everyone arriving at the border in June was immediately expelled because of Title 42. And all of these are going to be because of Title 42. 82% of all single adults presenting at the southern border were immediately expelled. 15% of all individuals in family units arriving at the border were expelled. So you're seeing the vast majority of adults or of family units being let in to seek asylum. And then 0% of all accompanied children were expelled. So you're seeing all unaccompanied minors able to apply and seek asylum in the U.S. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So here it is by nationality, and this is where it gets a little bit interesting, and that is 87% of all Mexicans presenting at the border were immediately expelled. 56% of all Guatemalans arriving at the border were immediately expelled. 54% of Salvadorians arriving at the border were expelled. 47% of all Hondurans arriving at the border were expelled. And 19%, only 19% of all of the other nationalities arriving at the border were expelled in June. Cubans, according to a recent report, the administration is actually generally agreeing to allow all Cubans in at the border. It doesn't matter if you're a family unit or an individual. And according to just a recent report that came out, only 4% of Cubans arriving at the border were expelled. So it's interesting dynamic, because you might think that that's kind of a discriminatory process that's happening. But there are some layers underneath that, and we don't know all of them right now, but there are some layers underneath that. I mean, the Mexican government might not be accepting these other nationalities back into their country. We know that they are for the Central American, Northern Triangle countries. They're accepting them back in. But some of these asylum seekers and immigrants that are coming from Africa or for coming from Cuba or Haiti, they're not receiving them back, or they're getting special treatment and they're being more readily exempt from Title 42. There's just different layers that are involved in that. And so one of the things we would encourage you to think about when you're looking at headlines that come across and they say record number of migrants presenting at the border or being apprehended at the border or whatnot, we are still under Title 42, which means that when you come to the border, either to a legal port of entry or you're coming in between borders and you're either trying to cross illegally or you're trying to cross in between ports of entry to seek asylum, we're seeing very high recidivism rates, and that drives numbers up. So recidivism. So, Title 42, when you come and present at the border, you're just being immediately expelled. So we're not taking the normal information and processing people like we normally would, because we're under this health code. And so I read a story just the other week about a guy who was trying to cross, and he tried 32 times. But since we're not taking the normal information and processes, he was able to try and recross and recross and recross because we didn't have his information, and we couldn't effectively expel him, and he didn't have any penalty to retry to cross the border. So there's a lot of reasons why we would hope that Title 42 would actually be lifted. We've got a little person coming in here. Yeah, bud. Sorry. Okay, you have a question. So, hold on to your question just 1 second, okay? So, according to the data we do have, Cubans are still being let in at higher rates, much higher rates than other nationalities right now, and even with Title 42 restrictions in place. So, yes, Cubans can seek asylum in the U.S. No, they can't do it by sea. It's actually immigration and international asylum laws that dictate that, and it's not just against Cubans. It's about anyone that's presenting by sea. And we're not seeing a mass exodus of Cubans or Haitians coming to the U.S. right now. At least that's not what the data is telling us. And then you have Cubans who are actually being let in at higher rates than other nationalities right now along the southern border. So that is the update about Cubans seeking asylum in the U.S. If you've got other questions, let us know. This allows us to kind of dive in and let us know what kind of conversations you're having in your communities and what you need to know, what kind of information is helpful to you. So thanks so much. Let us know what other questions you have. We'll be in touch.
Are you done?